He left the safe door yawning open like a mouth full of teeth and shut his eyes to pretend at sleep. He'd baited the room with money, careless stacks, loose bills, the soft scent of ink and cotton, waiting to hear the rustle of small hands betraying hunger. When the little girl entered, he braced for the sound of theft. What she did next froze him. Before we begin, if stories like this speak to your heart, feel free to share where you're reading from. It's beautiful to see how far a single story can travel. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The house that trust forgot. The tall windows of Richard Hamilton's study held the evening light like bowls of gold. The room was a museum of power, paintings that had crossed oceans, a grandfather clock that metronomed his thinking, the kind of leather armchair that kept a man feeling in control. Behind his desk, the wall safe was vast, steel jaws parted, bills spilling like an unruly river. He had set the trap himself. He had learned over 58 years the choreography of betrayal. He was a man who had once believed in words like partnership and marriage. A man who put his brother's name on the Hamilton Foundation plaque and watched that brother siphon funds with a smile. A man who fell asleep next to a woman who swore she wanted nothing but him, then woke to find his private accounts hollowed like dead trees. Every bruise had a lesson. Every lesson became a rule. Trust no one. Richard sat in the armchair with his eyes closed and his mind awake, counting down breaths. Beyond the heavy door, the house thrummed with standard life. A vacuum in the hall, somebody humming off-key, dishes stacking in the kitchen. His sister had arrived that morning from London, his father's princess, his own ruinous blind spot. Clara, with her camera-ready beauty and expensive carelessness, was already bleached into every conversation he'd had since sunrise. But right now, all he wanted to hear was the scuff of little shoes on polished wood. He had noticed the child lately, trailing the maid like a small bird shadowing its mother. 10, maybe 11. Thin braids, serious eyes. Amara, he'd been told, a name that felt like a prayer. He had also noticed the way the maid, Ngozi, looked at the child when even a crumb fell from the table. Not ours. Not ours. Even without words, Richard recognized the rhythm. Strictness is what love looks like when the world affords you no safety. He hadn't meant to become curious. He hadn't meant to hope. Footsteps, soft and near, a pause at the threshold. He could see her through his lashes, though he kept them low, a small figure framed by the light backpack slung like a habit, eyes widening at the exposed safe. Hunger flickered across her face like a cloud shadow over a field. She took a step inside. Another. The hush thickened. Then no hurried rustle, no pocketing motion. She knelt, small knees pressing into the carpet scrollwork, and began to gather the loose money the way children gather spilled petals, gently, carefully, the deep seriousness of play. She straightened the stacks against the square of her palm and squared them again on the shelf. She smoothed the edges with the same motions she'd seen her mother use on clean linen. And she hummed, a tune as old as work itself. His chest tightened. Somewhere inside him, something like frost began to thin. Not ours, she breathed to herself, so softly it felt like the air had spoken. Only tidy. Mama says a clean hand brings a clean heart. When the last bill was in place, she sat back on her heels and looked pleased, like someone who'd solved a puzzle perfectly. Her hand reached to push the safe door a few inches more closed, but not shut, and then the kitchen door snapped open like a whip crack and a basket of folded laundry tilted and spilled white onto the floor. Amara, the name broke out of Ngozi's throat sharp and fearful. She crossed the carpet in 3 quick steps and caught her daughter's wrist with hands that trembled. "What are you doing here? Why?" The girl flinched. "Mama," it looked messy. "I was." "No." The word was a blade. Ngozi glanced around the room, a gazelle listening for a lion. Her eyes landed on the half-shut safe and she swallowed hard. She gathered the bills with frantic gentleness and pressed them into a more proper stack. "We do not touch what is not ours. We do not go where we are not called. You must promise me. Say it." "I promise," Amara whispered. "I won't touch. I won't." Ngozi drew her close until their foreheads pressed. "My child," she breathed, "we have only our name to carry. Let it be clean." They left, the door whispering closed behind them, and Richard let out a breath he hadn't known he was holding. He opened his eyes into the last cut of light and stared at the safe as though it had told him a secret. Later, in the kitchen where the marble counter was a cold river between them, he gave Ngozi her pay. The envelope was heavier than usual. She weighed it in her hand, then frowned, eyes jumping up then down. "Sir," she said, careful, "I think there's a mistake." "No mistake." His voice felt rough with something he didn't want to name. "Reasons you may not understand yet." Her mouth opened, closed. Then she bowed her head. "Thank you," she said simply, the words sweet and plain in the air. He watched her walk away, watched the child skip to match her mother's stride, and wondered how a house built on suspicion could contain something so clear. Chapter 2. A hand that never took the quarters at the edge of the property weren't much. A low building with rooms that felt like temporary decisions. But a breeze rattled the hibiscus leaves, and the smell of clean soap drifted through. There, on a narrow bed against a cracked wall, Ngozi lay with her daughter tucked under her arm and remembered a different narrow bed in a different season of her life. There had been a boy with easy laugh and careful hands. She had believed him when he said forever. When her belly grew evidence, he laid excuses at her feet and walked away, taking the word with him. Her parents refused more than the man, they refused her too. In their eyes, her mistake was a stain that spread. For months she slept under a church eave and woke to wash other people's floors. Men looked through her like she was something to bargain for. Women looked away. But there was always one line she did not cross. "I will not take what is not mine," she promised the winter air. "I will not steal, not money, not mercy, not breath. The child inside me will inherit my name unsoiled, even if we are poor." When Amara came, one scream at a time in a charitable clinic, Ngozi held her like a brand new country and swore the oath aloud. "The world will not tell you who you are," she told the damp bundle. "I will." It was the Hamilton job that let them sleep without counting the hours left in the day. Rooms so big a whisper got lost. Floors that kept their own light. A backdoor key that felt heavier than any coin. And a boss whose face looked like the portraits on finance magazines, hard edges softened by expensive regret. She took the envelope of extra money that night and did what people do when the world has always taken more than it gives. She went back to the kitchen, found Mrs. Patel the housekeeper kneading dough with strong wrists, and slid the envelope across the flour-dusted counter. "Ma'am," Ngozi said, "please count this. If there's error, I will return it." Mrs. Patel opened the flap and nodded once. "I think your miracle is precise today," she said with a little smile. "Keep it." Ngozi folded the envelope into the inside pocket of her faded sweater and thought of shoes for Amara that did not let in rain. By morning, the extra money had already become bread, bus fare saved, a portion set aside for the woman in the next room whose boy had a cough that sounded like a tin bucket. If you've only ever had to stretch $1 until it thinned to paper, you learn that generosity is not an amount but a habit. Chapter 3. The sister with golden teeth, Clara Hamilton, arrived in a car that cost the price of a small house and a mood that demanded the weather improve. She swept into the foyer with luggage that rolled as though it knew its place. Her sunglasses stayed on her face until the mirror near the stair caught her angle and blessed it. At 24, she was already a veteran of rooms that applauded when she entered, parties, premieres, panels about nothing, where she said fashionable words and was paid with photographs. Richard loved her with the tired loyalty of an older brother who had already forgiven the future. She was their father's late indulgence, a baby for whom anything broken was replaced, not fixed. She called him Rich, the way some people called God by his first name. "Darling," she said now, pressing both cheeks to his. "Your house looks lonely." "It's a house," he said. "It doesn't know." "Well," she set her handbags down as if laying claim. "Tell it to learn, where is my room?" The house moved around her as houses do around certain people, obedient. A day later, something small went missing. A gold bracelet clasped like light around her wrist one evening, gone the next morning. Clara made a noise like a pulled thread and let everyone hear it. "I set it on the vanity," she said in the study, turning her mouth down like a seal of worry. "I didn't move it. I never move anything." Richard raised a single brow. "We'll look." They looked. It reappeared in a travel bag she had never opened, of course, the kind of accident anyone could have, and she flung herself into an apology that looked more like performance than remorse. "It's this house," she sighed. "So big, things walk." 2 days later, an envelope of cash from Richard's desk, earmarked for a charity gala. Then a perfume bottle, expensive enough to be its own treasure. The housekeeper asked the staff to keep to main corridors. The kitchen laughter quieted. When Clara passed, conversations curdled. Her gaze fell on all of it and then on Ngozi's daughter, who was, as usual, near the edges of a room, watching, learning. "Look at her," Clara murmured to Richard on the terrace, the champagne flute in her hand tilted just enough to catch light. "Children know how to be invisible until they're not." "She's a child," he said, "and children learn quickly. Don't be fooled by braids and wide eyes, Rich. The world we're in, people always reach for what doesn't belong to them when they think no one is looking." He flinched because she had found the angle of the old wound and pressed. Chapter 4, a necklace loaded like a gun by then, Clara's days had woven into secret nights. She slipped into the guest bath with her phone and call whispers that sounded like collisions. There was a man on the other end whose voice smiled without warmth. Vincent. She owed him money. She owed him favors. The debts were cords around her throat, tightening. "Just one piece," he told her in a voice like silk behind a blade. "Then your slate is softer." She stared at the velvet box on her vanity. The diamond necklace Richard had given her for her 21st birthday, ice and brilliance pooled in a curve. It was a story in stones. You are seen, you are adored, you are worth dressing up the world. She was not going to give it to Vincent. She was, however, good at sleight of hand. Let them look at the wrong thing, and you can do anything you want with the right one. She took the necklace, and with feet that knew the quiet places of the house, went to the servants' corridor. Their doors were all open then. No one learned to close doors until life taught them the necessity. In Ngozi's room, Amara's backpack leaned against the base of the bed, a butterfly sticker lifting at one corner. Clara stood very still in the doorway, listening. Water ran somewhere. A radio bled a song through a wall. The clock in the hall ticked like a held breath. She slipped the velvet box open with deft fingers and pressed the necklace deep into the backpack, under a book about constellations, and a pencil wrapped in duct tape to keep from splitting. Then she backed out the way she had come, each step a sentence she wanted to unsay and didn't. Her chest hurt. She told herself it was adrenaline. She told herself the girl would be fine. People like that always landed on their feet, didn't they? She knew that was a lie even as she tried it on. 2 days later, when the house gathered in the study as if pulled by the tide of her voice, she let the panic shake her like a theatrical curtain. "My necklace," she gasped. "It's gone, my necklace, someone has taken it." Richard set down the paper in his hands. The world's headlines suddenly felt like the wrong story. "Clara," he said. "Sit, tell me calmly." "No, we don't have time to be calm." She turned and her gaze snagged on the doorway where Ngozi hovered with a dust cloth, Amara half a step behind her, clutching her backpack. That was enough. She lunged. "Check their things, please, Richard." Ngozi's hands fluttered to her chest, then steadied into fists. "Madam," she said, voice low with dignity, "don't say what you will regret." "It's already regrettable," Clara snapped. "And if you're innocent, then you won't mind." Richard opened his mouth to object to the tone, to object to the fact that his sister thought she could rule his kingdom from the throne of panic. But he also felt that old quiet whisper, how quickly people blame, how quickly they surprise, and he did not stop anyone when Jonah, the butler with gray in his hair and everything seen in his eyes, took the backpack from Amara's thin shoulder. The zipper slid open. Someone breathed, "Oh," as if they'd stubbed a toe beside a coffin. At the bottom, the diamond necklace lay like a frozen river. "No," Ngozi said, and the word didn't sound like a refusal so much as a prayer with its throat cut. Clara put a hand to her own mouth, half hiding the small, victorious, terrible tremble at the corner. "God," she whispered, "I didn't want this to be true." Amara's hands had gone to her sides like she was trying to hold herself in. "Uncle Richard," she said softly, "I didn't touch it. Mama says our hands are for work not taking. Please believe me." Her voice was small and steady as a lit match in a storm. Richard wanted to wrap his fist around that flame and protect it. He also wanted to know, with an old and furious hunger, the truth. He did not raise his voice. He did not thunder. He did what men who have had enough of lies do. He stilled. "Everyone," he said deliberately, "leave the room. Now." Even Clara obeyed. He sat a long time in the study with the necklace on his desk, a glittering accusation. The gambler's math of his past started adding up. A brother, an ex-wife, a junior partner with a smile that turned to teeth. Doubt came and sat on his lap and breathed in his ear. But he had seen the little girl stack the money and hum. He had seen the mother pull the child away from temptation like a shepherd drags a lamb from the cliff edge. He touched the intercom button. "Tomas," he said to the head of security, "I need every frame of footage in the guest corridor for the last 3 days. Quietly. Do not tell a soul. If anyone asks, tell them I've lost a pen." Chapter 5. The tape and the tremor. Tomas brought the drive to the study at midnight, exhaustion under the grit in his eyes. He was a man whose posture had been ironed into correctness by years in uniforms. He knew the house as intimately as a map his life depended upon. Richard cued the footage and watched the gray-green hallway unspool its boring secrets. Hours of nothing happened. A Maid cart rolled by, a painter's ladder paused against the wall, then went on. At 10:37 on Tuesday, a slim figure moved like an apology against the wallpaper. Clara, in a slip of a dress too elegant for that corridor, paused outside the servant's door. She listened. She stepped in. She emerged 50 seconds later with the same brightness in her face she wore at parties when someone said her name. Then nothing. Then night. Tomas, who had seen everything and thus nothing surprised him, let out a low whistle. "I'll be in the hall," he said, and took his steady face elsewhere. Richard sat in front of the screen a long time after it went blank. The video recorder's clock ticked forward. The grandfather clock ticked answer. Something in him, ground down by years, woke. It was the part of him that could still be righteously angry. It was the part of him that could still be fair. He called them all to the study the next evening. When Clara tried to lean in the doorway like a woman untouched by gravity, he handed her the necklace without touching her fingers. "Do you know," he asked without preface, "what betrays a liar?" Her eyes flashed with impatience. "Bad luck." "The camera," he said. He pressed the remote. The screen on the far wall lit. The footage played. The room watched. Clara watched herself watch herself. For a moment she was perfectly still. Then her face blanched. The truth flared in the room like an alarm, and every person's gaze swung to it. Ngozi made a small sound in her throat, as if an arrow buried there had been pulled out. Amara looked from the screen to Richard to the screen again, confusion writing itself across her forehead in letters the room could read. Clara's mask cracked and something raw stared out. "Richard," she started, but the word died. She reached for the old weapons, wit, charm, a lower lip that drew pity like nectar, but they were useless now, sticks at a fire. His voice filled the room and shook it. "My own sister," he said. Each word felt like he'd taken it from his rib cage. "You brought a lie into my house. You put your hands on innocence and tried to stain it because your own hands are stained. Do you know what you've tried to do?" She flinched as though slapped, and in a way, she had been by the kind of truth that leaves marks. "I didn't, Richard, please, Vincent." She choked on the name and then forced it out. He's taken everything. I owe him. He said he'd. She swallowed. I needed you to push them out. He said. He was not uninterested in her trouble. He was not unloving. He was simply done allowing other people's pain to be cudgels against better people than them. Get out of my house, he said quietly. You will get help. I will ensure it. You will go to treatment and you will repay what you owe, legally and to the last cent. But you will not stay here one more night. Clara's mouth opened, closed. She nodded once and fled. The silence that followed was dense and so full it knocked emotions into the air like dust motes. Richard turned to Ngozi and to Amara, and his voice, when it came, had been dipped in humility. I doubted you, he said. Even after seeing you, even after knowing better. I let the ghosts of my past speak louder than the truth in front of me. I am sorry. Ngozi's eyes shone. Sir, she said, pain makes the heart cautious. We understand. She steadied her chin. We forgive. Amara stepped out from behind her mother and lifted her small hand as if it weighed something. Richard bent to take it and felt the warm, human reality of a child's trust. Mama says, she whispered, our job is to be right even when no one sees. It's hard, but God is looking. He couldn't speak for a moment. He squeezed her hand instead. Inside him, the frost broke apart and water ran. Chapter 6. Flame. You might think the truth would calm a house. But when you pull one lie out, the vacuum it leaves can make other, worse things rush in. Vincent's car idled on the street outside the Hamilton gates that night. A man who lived by other people's fear learns how to smell it. Clara had not told him about the camera. She had not told him she was going into treatment. She had tried to disappear to a safe place, a rehabilitation clinic with garden benches and group sessions softer than the hard rooms she'd avoided for years. He'd waited for her at the side door with a smile and found a locked window instead. Fine, he murmured to nobody. Another lever. He climbed the fence along the northern edge where it dipped before the hedges rose. There are people who can move in nice neighborhoods without being seen because the neighborhood thinks it's immune. He found a small window unlatched, the library's left open to let the air in and the brittle dust out. He slid inside. He was not a thief with taste. He was a thief with appetite. He picked up a silver picture frame, frowned at the faces, tossed it back. He went for the safe built behind the bookshelf, its hidden hatch as obvious to him as a lie. He couldn't crack it without noise. He could, if nothing else, leave a message. He tipped a bottle of whiskey onto the carpet and laid his lighter to it. Fire is always hungry. Sometimes it's too hungry too fast to think. The flame nosed along the rug like an animal catching scent, then leapt. He slipped out the window and into the night already imagining the call, the fear on the believer's line when he demanded money to protect what was left. Inside, smoke bloomed in the library like a hallucination, and the coal alarm on the ceiling coughed for attention. Amara was reading on the floor of the hallway outside the library because the air in the garden had cooled and her mother had told her to sit where someone could see her if the house called. She smelled the burn, acrid and hot, long before the alarm found its pitch. Her heartbeat said run. Her feet froze for 1 second, then decided. Mama, she shouted. From the kitchen, there was the clatter of a pot and then Ngozi bursting into the hall. Fire, Amara pointed, voice high and fierce with urgency. The library. Back, Ngozi said. Out we go. She reached for her daughter's hand. Amara grabbed the fire extinguisher mounted in the hall, small arms straining, and shoved it at her mother. I saw the video, she said, breathless. How to, in all large houses, there are emergency plans no one believes they'll need. Richard had them printed, framed, posted. They had laughed at him. Tonight, they followed them. But it is one thing to have a plan and another to move the human heart through smoke. On their way past the study, Richard stepped out with a handkerchief pressed to his mouth, eyes watering, and looked for the thing you look for when your life is burning. He looked for the faces he loved. Here, Amara cried, sharp as a bell. She threw him another extinguishing canister as if she'd been born doing it. Cover your mouth. Stay low. She's right, Ngozi snapped. Move! They should have gone all the way out. They did not. The thing that makes people noble is also the thing that kills them, the tendency to turn back for what matters. Richard glanced into the library as flame clawed its way up a shelf and licked at bindings, hot tongues reading titles it could not pronounce. Between a brand new first edition and an old photo album, a picture leaned against a bookend, its surface just beginning to bubble. A young woman in a white dress, hair pinned back the way women did in photographs when they were the only color in the room. Mother, taken the summer she decided to leave and then didn't for a year more of kindness. On her wrist, a bracelet he now kept in a drawer he never opened. He stepped without thinking. A beam fell. Fire burped. "Rich!" Ngozi shouted, voice breaking in a way that made him stop. He had learned to ignore alarms. There was a different command in her tone. He reached and snatched the frame and turned and stumbled, the smoke in his lungs biting like a wild dog. A piece of ceiling shifted and began to give. It would have come down on him, would have knocked him to floor and let flame have its way, if a small body hadn't slammed against his side with improbable, ferocious strength. Amara. She saw the falling square of plaster as if the room had slowed to let her. She hit him harder than she knew she could. They tumbled into the hall where air was no longer a memory but a presence. The ceiling fell. The fire roared as if cheated of a mouthful. "Out!" Ngozi commanded through the coughing, her hands on them both, mother and more. "Now, now." On the lawn, the night was a cold hand on hot skin. Richard's chest stuttered in irregular beats. His heart had been tricky for years, a fact he had treated like an annoyance, not a warning. The paramedics came with efficiency and kindness and put a mask over his face and told him it was okay, feel the numbers climbing, watch the numbers climb. He held the picture frame to his chest as if it had been attached there at birth. He looked at the child who had just knocked him out from under a small hell. The lights of the house made her eyes look glass black and bigger than before. She smiled, a tremulous, relieved thing, and then began to cry only when she saw he was going to live. What froze him, there on the lawn, wasn't the fear. It was the clarity. He had left a safe open to test if a child could resist what had never been hers. She had run into smoke to rescue what had never been hers either, his life. Chapter 7. The ledger of HEARTS. They slept on borrowed couches and in hotel rooms for a week while the house was cleaned and the library rebuilt. Smoke laid its hand on everything and would not let go. Some losses you understand the moment they happen. Some you only feel in the hours that follow, when you reach for a book or a jacket and touch ash. The investigators came and went. The cameras in the hedges caught Vincent's shape at the edge of night, and a neighbor's doorbell cam caught his plate. He was arrested on a Tuesday with his engine still running. Men who think they are always leaving are often caught already gone. Richard went to see Clara in the clinic down by the river, the kind of place where the staff could move through a room without stubbing their toe on someone's dignity. She wore a sweatshirt that made her look young again. Her face had an honest paleness to it. "I watched the fire on the news," she said when he entered. "I thought you were," she cut herself off. "I am sorry, Richard, I am so." The word was so heavy she could not carry it all the way to his feet. "He's in custody." "Yes." He sat across from her and set the picture frame down between them, a chapel of glass. "You will testify, you will get clean, and then you will repair." She nodded, tears sliding down without drama. "I hurt things I loved," she whispered. "And I wanted to blame the house for being too big and you for being too generous and the world for being unfair. But it was me. Richard, it was me." He did not forgive her there, and then as if forgiveness were a switch. But the humbleness felt like water after thirst. He left her with the picture and a kiss on the forehead, the same gesture he'd used when she was small and had scraped a knee and demanded a cast in pink. At the house, he found Ngozi in the garden where smoke smell had been replaced by rosemary and damp earth. She had a mug of tea between her hands and worry still around her eyes. "I'm paying you for 2 jobs," he told her. "What you were hired for and what you've been doing all along without a title, stewarding this home's soul." She tried to smile and failed. "I clean," she said. "You have a generous imagination. I do not." He took a folder out of his jacket and handed it to her. "Read it. And if you do not like it, throw it away and we'll find something else." She opened the folder like a door. Inside, a letter offering her the role of house manager with salary to match. A scholarship fund deed in Amara's name, set to bloom when she turned 18, with clauses that made the money safe from everything but her dreams. A path to citizenship papers if she wanted them, with good lawyers' names. A line that said, simply, "Your family, if you want to be. No performance required." Ngozi's hand went to her mouth. "Sir," she whispered and stopped. When you have always paid for the good things in your life with more work, a gift feels like something you don't know how to lift. She looked at him levelly then, the way equal souls look when they recognize themselves. "Thank you," she said. "I will be worth this." He shook his head gently. "You already are. The world just didn't pay attention." The legal team installed new layers of security, the kind that didn't scream wealth so much as whisper do not. Richard called a staff meeting and apologized publicly to every person who had felt the blast radius of the accusation. "There will be new policies," he said, "not to catch people in traps, but to keep any of us from mistaking convenience for truth. No searches without cause. No public charges without proof. This is a house in which dignity will be the default, not the reward." They painted the library fresh and put in shelves made by a carpenter who told them Wood remembers everything and is kinder for it. In the far corner, they mounted a small plaque that said, "In gratitude to those who held their own line when ours faltered." On the day the library reopened, the house felt like it was breathing fully again. Amara stood in the doorway a moment, inhaled the clean paper and varnish, and then ran her fingers along a row of spines the way people who love books say hello. Richard watched her and felt the tick of his heart rejoin the world's rhythm. "Uncle Richard," she said suddenly hushed, as if she were about to ask for something she wasn't sure she could have. "Yes. Can I put one of my books on your shelf?" "It's our shelf," he said. "Put as many as you like." She went to her backpack and pulled out a slim paperback with a frayed cover. The title was scuffed, "Constellations for Bright Nights." She placed it carefully between a heavy atlas and a poetry collection. Her book leaned a little. He felt an ache so sweet it hurt. "You know," he said after a beat, "the first test I set for you was wrong." She looked up at him, puzzled. "The safe?" "Yes." He shook his head, smiling without joy at himself. "I thought you could measure people by what they do when the door is left open. But the truer test was what you did when the door was closed and the house was burning. And that wasn't a test at all. It was simply you being who you are." She considered that seriously, as though adding a new star to a map. "Mama says," she offered, "we don't put our character on until someone is watching. We wear it like skin." "That's right," he said. "That's exactly right." Epilogue. The promised summer dropped its heat like a coin into the open hand of the day. In the late afternoon, the garden went drowsy. Richard found his leather chair again in the study, now set back from the repaired shelves, the new window glass showing a sky full of slow clouds. He did not leave safes ajar anymore. He did not pretend to sleep. Amara sat cross-legged on the rug with a puzzle spread around her like a city in construction. Ngozi worked at the desk, typing an email to a contractor. What a sentence that would have been a year ago, a joke, and now simply Monday. "What's for dinner?" Richard asked to no one in particular. "Mrs. Patel says it's stew," Amara answered without looking up from matching a corner blue to another blue. "Don't ask her what kind yet, or she will say food flavor and make you wait." He laughed. It was a simple sound. It had not been easy to get it back. His sister sent postcards from a rehab place where they made them paint their feelings and talk about the first time they remembered being small. Her handwriting was steadier now. She wrote about fear as if she had befriended it. Vincent went to court. Clara stood up 3 months later and told the truth in a voice that did not tremble. She apologized without explaining it away. The court did what courts do, punctuated by strangers' lives. Some things are not fixed, they are tended. Richard went back to his office when the house had settled into its new shape and looked at his old ledgers. Dee thought his wealth was a set of numbers and the quiet that numbers buy. He found out it was something else, a ledger of hearts where the credits and debits were measured not in dollars but in decency. He made new entries. A scholarship in his mother's name, not for students with perfect grades, but for those whose teachers wrote in the margins. This one steadies the room. A grant for the clinic where Amara had been born. He called it the Clean Hands Fund, and the plaque did not carry his name. There were scars. Inhale deeply in the library and you could still find the thin thread of smoke memory, a warning woven into the weft. Walk past the servants' corridor, and the door that used to be left open now had a habit of closing on its own. No one minded. Not all doors should be open. On a Wednesday, Richard took a nap for the first time in years, a real nap, honest as sleep. He woke to the sound of laughter, Amara's first, spilling, then Ngozie's, richer and darker. He was on his feet before he knew it, because love is a reflex as much as fear, and crossed the study to the hall. In the archway, he stopped. They were standing side by side at the kitchen counter, tasting stew from a spoon and arguing about whether it needed one more pinch of spice. Amara reached for the salt, and Ngozi swatted her hand lightly. Not salt. Comin', you greedy girl, and they both laughed again. The kind of laugh that tells a house it is not only intact, it is inhabited. He leaned against the doorframe with his hands in his pockets and let himself watch the smallness of it. Not the operatic scenes that had made him feel alive by making him flinch, not the high-wire acts of betrayal and repair. Just soup, just love, just the thing he had always wanted but hadn't known how to name. Ngozi looked over and caught him watching. "You look like a man who has learned to see," she said gently. "I am," he said. He could have told her a story then about waking up on his 20th birthday with nothing but vision and rage, about the years in between and the ruin, about how trust is a muscle that atrophies when overused and dies when unused. He didn't. He stepped forward, picked up a spoon, and tasted the stew. The cumin made it warm all the way down. "Perfect," he said. Amara made a face. "Not perfect," she corrected him with the ruthless honesty of children. "Better," he nodded. "Better," he agreed. And because he had learned to say out loud the things that mattered before the house burned or the people left, he added, "Thank you for saving my life." Amara blinked, surprised that the thanks had an address so near. She shrugged one small shoulder shyly, embarrassed by the bravery that had felt like no choice at all. "You're welcome," she said. I didn't think. You wore your character like skin," he said quietly. "Oh," she smiled. "Yes." That night, as the sky laid its darkest cloth over the edges of the city, and the house's windows answered with squares of light, a little girl went to sleep in a room that felt safer than any place she had ever known. A woman wrote the next day's schedule in careful script, then set the pen down on a desk that had once been too big for her and was now just right. A man in a leather chair closed his eyes and, for once, wasn't watching for the sound of betrayal. He was listening to the breath of a home that had learned to trust itself again. What had frozen him once was the fear that everyone would take from him. What froze him now was the wonder that some people bring more than they ever ask, quiet rearrangers of scattered bills, small shoulders under falling ceilings, hands that hold the world honest. True wealth, he had learned too late and just in time, measures itself in the lives you are brave enough to believe in. The next morning, the safe door was closed. The window was open. And in the library, on a clean shelf between weighty volumes, a thin paperback leaned, stubborn and bright, like a star you can always find once someone has shown you where to look.